The Forbidden Pyramid of Zawiyat el-Aryan. So, forbidden? Yes, because today it is on a military ground, and the construction of this military ground, unfortunately, has completely destroyed the enclosure of the pyramid site. Yes, also because if we refer to the usual English terminology, it's an unfinished pyramid. However, what was discovered by the German archaeologist Lepsius in the middle of the 19th century is called the Great Excavation in French. And when we see the appearance of this incredible site, the French term is much more suitable and closer to reality than the English term of unfinished pyramid. Zawiyat el-Aryan may have been intended to be one of the most incredible sites in all of Egypt once completed, to such an extent that it would be absolutely great to be able to study it more in depth. When I mention depth, I'm not referring to this amazing 106-meter long trench. Unfortunately, due to the odious hand of man who has invested in this site unreasonably for a purely modern purpose, crucial information regarding the preparatory phases of pyramid construction has disappeared forever. This trench I was talking about, it was used to transport blocks of limestone or granite. So we understand that we are contemporaries of other incredible constructions, including the Meidum Pyramid, the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid of Dashur, as well as the pyramids of Giza, whose architectural and masonry proportions are in every way similar to that of Zawiyat in el-Aryan. So today, there is still hesitation regarding the attribution of this site, because indeed there has been no remains, no really datable artifact found on the site. Yet, given the incredible tangle that the site was when it was discovered, it is very unlikely, almost impossible that it was looted. Which means in any case that the site is known, that it was discovered as it was left by the Egyptians. And its discovery, it was made while it was still covered with thousands of cubic meters of limestone. And it took years of excavations and efforts to be able to clear them. So when I say limestone blocks, how much is it? Well, these 4,200 cubic meters of blocks like that, stacked on top of each other, up to a height, as we say in our Alsace, of 15 meters, beyond what these blocks constituted as a break on looting. It will also be noted that after only 3 months of excavation break, the Italian Barsanti will have to dispatch 50 men for an entire week to remove the sand. The site is a little later, between 1906 and 1911. It was 3 meters of sand that then covered the site. We can therefore affirm, without too much hesitation, that this site was found as it had been abandoned several thousand years ago. Whether it was Barsanti at the beginning of the 20th century or his compatriots Marajoglio and Rinaldi in the 1960s. This site has not been sufficiently explored and studied to be of any real chronological use. But very quickly, Barsanti dated this site to the 4th dynasty thanks to dozens of inscriptions he found. Like the Mera papyri, the intelligible inscriptions only mention teams of workers. The rare inscriptions containing names and cartouches, the cartouche is what represents the name of the pharaoh, seem to refer to people we are unaware of, and their existence and role in the social or royal strata of Egypt at the time. However, the current consensus attributes this site to the pharaoh Baka, who, according to the Greek historian Manetho, would have been the 6th pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. However, there are 2 minor caveats to this. On one hand, Manetho had listed Khephren and Mykerinos as the 3rd and 4th pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, when in fact they are 4th and 6th. However, the pharaoh Baka's name is not found on the legendary list of Abydos kings, although it is indeed on the Saqqara table and on the royal canon of Turin. To know what the site looked like at the time of the excavations, the only modern solution is to rely on the images filmed the last time the large pit was cleared of its sand, to serve as a backdrop for the 1954 film Land of the Pharaohs, released in cinemas in 1955. When you search on Wikipedia, you can read that the few findings claimed by Barsanti were neither published nor preserved. Well, that's false. They were indeed published in the Annals of the Antiquities Service of Egypt. in Volume 7, published in 1906, page 257 to 286. In Volume 8, published in 1907, and in Volume 12, published in 1912. These publications, they were analyzed by Rinaldi and Maragioglio, the Italians from the 60s I was talking about a little earlier. And here's what they have to say about it. The excavations of the complex were conducted incompletely, unscientifically, and incompetently. Possibly due to resource scarcity, Barsanti demolished the huge platform while seeking an underground burial chamber, quixotic. I bore the responsibility for the devastation, largely to Maspero, a Frenchman who was then the Director General of Antiquities. Maspero, who should have prevented them, or at least limited them to a minimum, essential for profitable scientific research which should never have been entrusted to Barsanti. The reports of the latter are incomplete and difficult to interpret due to the inaccuracy and imprecision of the terms used. The measurements given by Barsanti continually vary and often do not correspond to those obtained from the drawings, which are, in turn, not always in agreement with each other. In short, it's a bit of a mess with Barsanti. In Barsanti's archives, precisely, we learned that, and I quote, "we were dealing with a pyramid that had been started and whose construction was suddenly interrupted. Sudden death of the builder, change of residence, revolution, foreign invasion, or incident which, in the eyes of the Egyptians, would have made the locality unsuitable for burial." It is always quite surprising to find pyramids like this in Egypt, which are unfinished or which have served, in quotes, for nothing. Because on the site of Zawiyat el-Aryan, 1.5 kilometers from there, so still nearby, there is a pyramid that was intended for the pharaoh. Don't wait for me to say bullshit, Sanofraoui. He didn't even want to occupy it at the time, which is quite surprising. Just as it's always surprising that Snefru would have asked for the construction of 2 pyramids, 2 cenotaphs, or 2 tombs for a single pharaoh, with the red pyramid and the rhomboidal pyramid. And a little more personally, it's true that I can't help but be surprised by the very childish nature of some hieroglyphs, which we find, notably the inscriptions found by Barsanti, or others that we find in the Cairo Museum or on the tank of the Serapeum, which you may have already discovered in other videos. But anyway, Gaston Maspero, he says in his annals, "I granted him permission to probe the bottom of the excavation and to push galleries under and into the granite and limestone foundations. Before leaving the site, he will put back all the blocks he has moved, he will backfill all the galleries he has dug, and he will hide the entrance." All this because Barsanti was convinced that despite the unfinished nature of the pyramid or site, the pharaoh's remains lay beneath the granite floor of the pyramid. In fact, we would have witnessed the largest volume of granite at the core of any Egyptian pyramid, with nearly 1,000 cubic meters. God only knows what it would have been like if the pyramid had been completed, perhaps with a granite facing. So why did Barsanti think that even if the pyramid, or what we believe to be a pyramid, was not completed? Why did he think that the pharaoh was indeed buried under the granite floor of the base of this huge pit? I'll give you a quote, precisely, from his annals. "Just as the work seemed about to succeed, a real deluge struck and the well was flooded up to a height of 3 meters. Around midnight, the water suddenly dropped by about a meter. I can only explain this phenomenon by assuming that it sank into some underground galleries, large enough to contain 380 cubic meters of water. Gaston Maspero, however, believes searching for this pharaoh under the granite ground is a feasible option. Although the terms used in the annals are on the reserve and respect for the Egyptian heritage. It seems that only 60 years later, this venture was more akin to vandalism than anything else. Despite months of work, excavations, vandalism, let's be clear, nothing is found. On the other hand, we are struck by the site's enormity. With granite plugs 2 meters by 2 and a slab, also made of granite 5 meters thick, I did say thick. There are many quite contradictory elements to such an extent that it is difficult to imagine that it is really a pyramid. Although it's always quite complicated when we nuance everything, although we find a little bit the same trench in an unfinished pyramid, or in any case exploded, at Abu Rawash, north of Giza. So, we can legitimately ask the question, was it meant to be a pyramid? The extensive excavation of Zawiyat el-Aryan exhibits rather unusual characteristics. Although we find the materials and the gigantism which refer us in a not at all equivocal way to the 4th dynasty, or at least to a contemporary era of those who built the pyramids of Giza and Dashur. In what can puzzle us, we find what is called a sarcophagus, or at least what some call a sarcophagus, likely due to the lack of a more suitable term for this strange shape. We have here an oval object, a geometric figure highly atypical for Egypt of this time, which Barsanti thought to be rather an offering hotel. But the craziest thing in this story is that this oval shape is a monolithic piece of granite that is one with the ground on which it was believed to be placed. It's extremely unusual, as crazy and gigantic as it is unusual. The only other place in Egypt where I have seen something somewhat similar is at the bottom of a well in front of the Pyramid of Unas in Saqqara. As a historical reminder, the Pyramid of Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, is located at Saqqara. Well, it's the first pyramid in Egypt to have its burial chamber decorated. And so here we have a well about 10 to 12 meters deep, as we find elsewhere in Saqqara, at the bottom of which we have this shape. The reaction we have when seeing it is frankly quite primal and trivial. We ask ourselves, what the hell is this thing doing here? And here too, it's certainly not a sarcophagus. I'm mentioning the unique shape at the bottom of the Saqqara well to explain its purpose. Barsanti's intuition wasn't as absurd as that, even if it came from the evacuation of water, the divine rains that watered his mission. In Saqqara, when we brave the overwhelming vertigo,
when we look a little bit at the bottom of the well, we see 2 doors identical in underground passages.
On the plateau, particularly in the mastabas, on the south face of the Sphinx, we see this accessible to somewhat independent minds. At first, we think these doors might be contemporary, dug during excavations or in an attempt to access them for the first time. Well, no, because in April 2018, when I was in Saqqara at that time, the major excavations of Saqqara were beginning. The excavations that have given us hundreds and hundreds of discovered sarcophagi for almost a year now. And so, in April 2018, I was able to cross paths with an archaeologist who was part of the excavations and who confirmed to me that these are underground galleries leading to this kind of large shape. It's inexplicable, and the Petritzel's guards can't be bribed to access these undergrounds. All this to say that, given the quite astonishing shape that we find at the bottom of this well in Saqqara, which is connected by underground galleries, it's no more stupid than anything else to imagine that at Zawiyat el-Aryan. At the bottom of this pit, beneath this other oval shape like that, extremely unusual, well, we might have other galleries that might lead to the remains of a pharaoh. As for the question of the pyramid, if there had been a pyramid, I simply wonder why. We have all these blocks stored 15 meters high at the time of discovery at the bottom of the pit. Did the Egyptians want to condemn the site after realizing that the construction would not be completed? Or is it to condemn something that no longer fulfills its sacred function? One might also wonder if they wanted to clean up the mess a little after the end of the construction, even if it would not be completed. To this question, my immediate answer is no, I don't think so. Insofar as, around this pit and this trench, we find a lot of granitic remains, small and large pieces a little everywhere. These pieces allow determining the site's location. So if they went to the trouble of arranging all the granite here, presumably, they would have also gone to the trouble of arranging all the granite around the site. That's not the case. So there's a specific reason why we have these 4,200 cubic meters and these 15 meters of limestone. But what, I don't know. However, we do have a base of blocks that would suggest a larger scale construction. Could it have been a new type of mastaba? And if it was indeed a pyramid, then we would have confirmation that the construction is done from the inside before sealing it all up. And since we've already talked about gigantism, if there was a finished pyramid, what would its dimensions have been? Barsanti provided a map of the ground layout with some measurements, but did not specify the nature of the blocks. At the limit, it's not serious. It appears to be a wing-shaped granite floor surrounded by limestone on a total surface area of nearly 380 square meters at a depth of 25 meters. As for the rest, it is estimated that the pyramid would have been 210 meters on each side with a height of about 140 meters. The proportions match those of Khufu and Khafre's structures. The building may have been intended for Pharaoh Baka. to budget constraints between November 10, 1906 and November 27, 1911, the excavations halt while damage to the site is confined to a few blocks in the pit and several wells and tunnels. Frustrated at finding nothing until late 1906, Barsanti quickens his pace and begins removing the western blocks from the pit. When work resumed, Barsanti reported the following. As soon as our camp was set up, I gave the stonecutter the order to proceed with the removal and transport out of the excavation of the limestone blocks from the eastern part of the monument. This was to allow me to obtain not only the location I needed to store the granite blocks, but also the space my men needed to maneuver without too much danger. In summary, we clear everything. I acknowledge that reading these annals can occasionally be somewhat challenging, because we are far from the respectful considerations for the instructions of Maspero that he had given a few years earlier. In just 1 month, Barsanti removed 7 granite blocks for a total of 231 tons. Riding the wave of new excavations, he reaches 426 tons of granite removed, always ensuring to promote himself. Stating that all of this is achieved thanks to the goodwill of all and the perfect homogeneity of my teams, understand by this I have managed to select and lead my teams well. I want to say, Barsanti, do you want a medal? Because honestly, the guy, he's not stupid, he knows he's doing shit. He's like that, caught a little bit by a sin of pride, and he can't back down. He has to find the thing, he wants to go to the end of his intuition. So, you still have to try to puff yourself up a little bit so as not to appear as amateurish as the 2 Italians described in their studies of 1960, well, the 60s. In his report, he specifies the operation could raise criticisms and aims to facilitate the replacement of the moved parts. I imposed on myself to meticulously note down, as I went along, the location plan of each row using the system that served me so well at the Temple of the Madmen. I number the blocks immediately after detaching them and mark their original location, size and weight on my plan. In order to avoid any confusion, I also use a different color for the numbering of each of the 4 oranges. So there, I want to say frankly, dude, it's a good thing you're numbering and cataloging scrupulously. Everything that is removed, everything that is destroyed from the site, thank goodness, that's all we need. The removal of the blocks was particularly difficult until, due to lack of budget, once again the project ended prematurely. For Barsanti, the builders had obviously used all means at their disposal to make the blocks inviolable. As they were accustomed to, the Egyptians assembled unique blocks which required disrupting the whole. As soon as you wanted to touch one, it seems obvious that the builders took great care to protect something. This something could well be this oval shape we were talking about. It seems we have a clever puzzle, a block lighter built purposefully to protect it. Anyone wishing to remove this reservoir was going to have to work extremely hard to achieve it, so hard that even the Barsanti teams did not succeed. World War I. Passing through there, no one set foot on the site to excavate, or check if Barsanti kept his promise by replacing the blocks. If he had to stop the excavations due to lack of funds, it's unlikely he would stay longer just to clean up. According to Maraggio, Glio and Rinaldi, our Italian friends from the 60s, the excavated blocks were never replaced and the pit remains as Barsanti left it. However, work may have been done for the 1955 film so that the pit could be cleared during filming. Although it is not clearly visible in the film, Maraggio, Glio and Rinaldi still tried. A reconstruction in which they chose a layout reminiscent of the chambers of the 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids. This was done by default because their study found that no known funerary chamber from 4th dynasty pyramids could have been duplicated. Here, whether it's the still beautifully red or rhomboidal chambers of the Dashur pyramids, or even the granite chamber of Khufu, on the screen you have the reconstruction. The dotted lines show the outline of the planned chamber or chambers corresponding to the granite floor and the north entrance corridor with its 3 portcullises. But this does not explain why they built a pyramid 25 meters deep. Some have suggested a return to a design like that of Djoser's step pyramid, where the central pit is also 25 meters deep. However, the access corridor to Djoser is flat and the pit is dug vertically, like the rains I mentioned before. So, it's true that Egyptology concludes to an unfinished pyramid, but there are too many elements on which we do not have a definitive answer. which would lead us to have a little bit of restraint regarding the conclusions and interpretations we can make. However, the pit is so incredible that Maspero at the time had said this. The impressive materials, flawless cuts and joints, and the exquisite granite basin finish. Then, on the other hand, the boldness of the lines and the height of the walls, everything comes together to compose a unique ensemble. So far it's like a shock that one feels. And nowhere does the power of the old Egyptian architects reveal such a sudden force. This immense pit, the friends of 380 square meters, and the trench leading to it leaves one speechless. What would be the purpose of doing all this if in the end we wanted to cover this whole pit to make it a room? And why was this trench so wide if in the end as well we wanted to have a corridor 1 meter by 1? As we have in almost all the other pyramids, in any case, the largest and most beautiful pyramids that we still have standing today. And if precisely a room was planned with its ascending passage 2 cubits wide, then there is no need to make such a complex paving. These complex pavings, we find them in the floors of temples or on the esplanades in front of and around pyramids. But never inside, because the building, it, will not move. Inside the pyramids, the stones making up the chamber floors are aligned, never in a puzzle. It should be the case here too, especially since here we are in the sea rock, so in terms of stability, we are good, nothing is going to move. So, if English speakers use unfinished pyramid, and the French rather use the term large excavation as the remains of a pyramidal construction process. Friends, let's prefer caution, adorned with an exciting and also frustrating question mark. I agree, because it seems clear that this site will never be used again for archaeological studies. And that sucks. Well friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it allowed you to discover or rediscover this absolutely incredible site, about which, unfortunately, I think we will never know more than what we know. Through the few sources that I allowed myself to share with you and that I mentioned in the description. Yeah, like I said, it sucks. Because it's the craziest site. When you see it in a photo, for me, it's the craziest site in all of Egypt. Until the next meeting on the channel, friends, as always, take care. And above all, don't forget to keep the passion. Bye. Bye.